Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise, honor, and glory to the Most High God, Yahweh. There's only begotten Son, Yahshua, who the world called Jesus Christ. This is Shoji Guy Sean Kanachal with another sit down. As y'all can see by the title of this video, we're going to be tackling the conspiracy to destroy the so-called black man. And obviously, the so-called brown, Latino, Hispanic man is included in this as well, right? So some people hear the word black and think it's only applied to the so-called African-American man. No. It's applied to the so-called African-American man. It's applied to the Haitian man, right? Any so-called black or brown man from black or indigenous descent that's living in America right now, there's a concerted effort to destroy your people, right? And it's high time you awake out of that, right? It's high time you come to realize what that effort entails, right? What that effort entails, right? So there's literally a concerted effort to destroy our people, and our people are none the wiser for these things. So as you can see by the title of this video, we're going to be diving into the African-American boy, right, or the so-called black or brown man child, I should say, right, man-child, I should say, right? So we're going to be diving into the dynamics of that, of being a so-called African-American man, boy, growing up in America, and how hard that is, right? The uphill battle it is for you to navigate that, right, with in a nation that's systemically built to oppress you, to make sure you don't even grow past 25. So we're going to be tackling that through the scriptures, as well as, Lord willing, through some statistics that will help drive the point home, right? So I'm going to start at a very basic point also. I'm going to start at a very, very simple point, and we make a point to bring this scripture out while we're teaching in the highways and byways, right? So, what is this? Right, so this is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6 and verse 7. And we'll start at verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thy heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. In context, this is Moses talking to the children of Israel, and the words that he's speaking to them, they're the commandment that the Most High God gave him to give to the children of Israel, right? So the importance of teaching these commandments, right, teaching a set of morals to our children is very, very important, right? Raising our children up with some sort of moral integrity, right? Raising our people up to be people of character, especially the so-called black boys, because his future, right, his destiny and his contribution in a black nation is so vital, right, that it's of the utmost important that he grows up in the right way, the so-called black boy, right? So his contribution, or his would-be contribution, or the thing that he should be contributing, had to be nurtured into him from a young age, which we're failing to do as a community, right? So there is a conspiracy to destroy our people, and we're the biggest, if not one of the biggest, I should say, contributors to the conspiracy, because we're lacking understanding, we're lacking knowledge, right? So I'm going to follow that up with a precept, a very basic precept that our people go to, right, when we're teaching the Bible, but it's a precept that very few really grasp the reality of what that means, right? We bring it out a lot, and perhaps it's because it's been overused or oversaturated that people have become numb to the deeper meaning to that scripture, right? Which, not to sound mystical or anything like that, but really examining that scripture, understand, and seeing it play out in real life, we see how truly alive that scripture is, right? So I'm going to go to the book of Hosea, in chapter 4 and verse 6. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, because thou rejected knowledge. I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest unto me, seeing that thou hast forgotten the law of thy God, right? So we were just through the Spirit, we were just going to Deuteronomy 6, right, which talks about teaching the law to our children day and night, meaning what? Meaning putting them in remembrance, juxtaposing to this scripture, which shows our people have forgotten the law of the Lord, right? Which is why which is a byproduct of us being destroyed, right? Which is a byproduct of us having no knowledge, right? So us being destroyed, it correlates with us not knowing who we are, not knowing the customs which our forefathers or our fathers are supposed to teach us from infanthood. The so-called men, right? Not the so-called men, but the men, the so-called African-American boy, right? He's supposed to grow up to be a so-called African-American man who's supposed to lead his community, but he can't do that if you destroy him from a young age. You can't do that if you fill his mindset with being a drug dealer, if you fill his mindset with just growing up to be a basketball player, which millions of kids, which millions of boys want to grow up and be basketball players. Only, what, 10% of that actually get a chance to play professionally and make money, right? So what about the other 90%? What about the other 80% that don't get that chance? What then? Their dreams are crushed, and now they revert back to the streets, right? Now they revert back to robbing each other. Now they revert back to destroying the community, right? Salakia. Instead of being realistic with one another, right? Instead of having backup plans, but they can't have those backup plans because they were never taught by men, right? So it's a cycle. They were never taught by men that were around to actually nurture masculine. People say toxic masculinity, but toxic masculinity is the lack of a masculine figure, right? Toxic masculinity is brought about by men trying to figure out what it means to be men by themselves, or boys trying to figure out what it means to be men by themselves. That's what toxic masculinity is, right? So there's a concerted effort on the part of those people that are not of our nation, that surround us, that know that once we come into power, it signals the end of their empire, right? There's a concerted effort to stop the rise of our empire, right? So, actually, let me get that. Where is my power? Let me get that, right? Why there's a concerted effort. This is the book of 2nd Ezra, chapter, I believe it's 6. I haven't brought this precept out in so long. This is the book of 2nd Ezra, chapter 6 and verse 9. For Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that follows. See, those people that are in power, they understand this precept very well, that they are the end of the world, right? And we are the beginning of the one that followeth, and us starting to rise signalize the end of their empire. So there's a concerted effort. There's a very intentional effort that they're putting forth to keep our people down, whether it's through redlining, right? Whether it's through the school to prison pipeline, whether it's through things of that nature to keep our people down, to keep our community destroyed, right? Whether it's through simple social media ploys like red pill, or toxic masculinity, or feminism, or things of that nature that destroy the unity that our people should have. So there's many, many ploys that are being thrown at our people, and we are ever none the wiser at the ploys that are being thrown at us, right? Because we lack the knowledge of who we are. We lack the knowledge that we unite us as one people group, right? So we're gonna tackle the so-called African-American man, the so-called African-American Latino boy, right? Because they are those who grow up to lead the community, right? And you would hope that the leaders of the community are people that are adequate, right? And competent enough to lead our people out, but they're not. Why? Because they haven't been nurtured in good soil, right? They had to grow up in pavements, right? They had to grow up, and it's a rare thing nowadays to see a so-called black man, a so-called Latino man live past the age of 25. I'm from the city of Philadelphia, right, where a rapper goes by the name of Meek Mill, to say it's rare, roughly paraphrasing, for a so-called black man to live past 25, right? It's very rare, and sadly, that's the reality of our people all across America, that it's very, very rare that we make it past the age of 25, whether it's by the means of our own people trying to gun us down, or it's by the means of the people around us just don't want to see us come up, right? Whether it's by the means of our own people, our own hand, trying to get by, trying to have to eliminate the next man just so we can get by, or happenstance of the heathen that are around about us just not liking us, right? So I'm gonna go to the book of Isaiah. Give me 1 second. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 3. And verse 12. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths, right? The people who are supposed to be leading us, they're childlike in nature. Give me 1 second. Right? So the people that lead us, they're childlike in nature, right? They haven't matured up. They haven't actually had to sit back and analyze what they've gone through, right? They haven't actually done the maturing process that it takes. But these are the people that are in charge of other people, right? These are the people that are influencing the lives of other people, right? We have multiple millions, not millions, but thousands of influencers, so-called black influencers, right? But none of them are giving our people the actual information that they need, which is these laws, statutes, and commandments, to better themselves. They all have an agenda, right? Every leader of our people have an agenda that's self-serving, right? It's not for the betterment of our people, right? And we are the ones that lose, right? The people that are being influenced, being none wiser. The sheep that are following, we're the ones that end up being destroyed for just following, right? We're the ones that end up suffering for their self-indulgence, the ones that are self-serving, the ones that don't want to look towards their people. They want to look towards their own gain. And once they get it, they could care less how many people they sacrifice to get there. They could care less how many minds they destroy to get there, right? The Sexy Rares, the Megan Thee Stallions, right? They could care less whether they're voting for Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris is one of the biggest prosecutors and one of the biggest detriments to the so-called black community, locking up black men, right? They could care less as long as they get a check out of that, right? They'll show up to the Democratic convention, right? Play a few ratchet songs, turn up, get y'all to vote for Kamala Harris, right? Get y'all to endorse her and see her as a so-called black woman, which she's not, right? They're self-serving. They don't care whether they're leading you into a ditch or not, right? They're blind guide leading the blind, right? And our people are the ones that fall into a ditch because they don't care if they fall into a ditch. They already sold their soul. They already know they're in a ditch, right? They're in a ditch and they're pulling you down. But this is the state of our people. This is the state that we find ourselves in, right? The blind leading the blind, right? The community is destroyed. Everybody's suffering, right? And everybody's looking towards their own gain. But for us to fix that, right? Few people, right? The righteous people that you see on corners and on the highways, right? The highways, looking crazy. They're the ones willing to take a stand. They're the ones willing to fight back, right? And ultimately, they're the ones that's gonna, crazy as it sounds, right? They're the ones that's gonna lead you out of this, right? They're the ones that's gonna lead you out of this through the Spirit of the Most High God, right? By means of Yahushua Mashiach, who the world calls Jesus Christ. Everybody's waiting for him to come back, right? What do you think is gonna happen when he comes back, right? But we're going to look at the situation of the so-called black and Latino boy in America, right? We're going to look at the situation of the so-called black and Latino boy in America, right? Give me 1 second. So the so-called black or Latino boy has a couple of hard obstacles to go through, right? To even grow up if he's has the chance to grow up, right? Well, first and foremost, it's statistically proven that to raise a child, you need at least a two-parent household, right? You need at least a stable two-parent household to raise a stable child, to raise a child that's not effeminate, right? And we are, by and large, the number one people that are affected by single-parent household, right? We're the ones that are affected by single-parent household. And to add insult to injury, we're the ones that have to work multiple jobs due to the single-parent household, right? And therefore not being able to be there properly for the child, right? So we're the ones that are suffering by and large from this, right? And this is part of the curses, right? So a so-called African-American boy has a lot to go through before he can even be in a position or be in a place to lead his community. And there's many obstacles placed in his community on purpose, right? So I'm gonna get the curses which affect us. All right, so this is Deuteronomy chapter 28. And we're going to start at verse 56. Verse 54. So So that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eyes shall be evil toward his brother and the wife of his bosom, right? So the man that is tender among you, the man that is tender from age, that has no experience from life, right? The man that is tender, the man that is loving, the man that hasn't been through so many trauma in life yet. He's just young. He's hopeful. He's optimistic, right? He's not pessimistic, right? Even his eyes shall be evil toward his wife, right? Even his eyes going to look towards his wife cruelly, and towards the wife of his bosom, and towards the remnant of his children, which he shall leave, right? It's just innately in him, right? Which that could be epigenetics, right? Which in slavery, you would just bring in a buck through and having them raise up children, not having to take care of them, and pass them on to the next plantation. That was going on. So it could be epigenetics, right? But it's also part of the curses that we're suffering from, right? So all these things that we're going through, single parent households, right? Unstable household, right? So let's see. This is an article written by Brad Wilcox. I'm going to put every link, Lord willing, I can find them after I'm done, but I'm going to save these links and I'm going to put them in the description below. So if you guys want to check them out, you can, right? Do two parents matter now more than ever, right? This year, American men and women who think that marriage and a stable family are not important for children in our contemporary world is growing, right? So there's a lot of people that think that. Right? There's a lot of people that think it's not important, which I would very readily disagree with, right? Because how can you raise a child? How can you raise a boy to be a stand-up man if he doesn't have his mother in his life and his father in his life? What example of masculinity does he have, right? He absolutely needs a positive male role model in his influence in his life to influence him, right? Not a rapper, right? Not a basketball player, because those are people he sees through a screen. That's not a realistic day-to-day of what a man should be, right? He has to fill in the gaps of what he's not seeing, right? And his imagination can take him anywhere. That's not a realistic approach, right? Yeah, I just received a call, but back to the regularly scheduled program. I'm gonna put all the links in the description, right? So you guys can check them out, right? So this is the article, Do Two Parents Matter More Than Ever, right, by Brad Wilcox, and this was done in September 20 of last year, 2023. So we're gonna skim through the article a little bit, right? Recent research on family structure and children, right? So it reads, however, a growing body of evidence not only contradicts the conventional wisdom, journalistic narratives, and academic assertions that stable married family is of little or no importance to children, but also indicates something quite different. In fact, marriage and a stable two-parent family appear to matter more than ever for children on a range of outcomes. Recent research suggests that an intact family is increasingly tied to financial, social, and emotional welfare of children, and family instability is more strongly linked to worse outcome for kids than it used to be. The upshot of children is that of marriage not only still matters, but seems to matter more than ever. Children who have the benefit of two parents are comparatively more advantaged today than they were in previous decades. So not only is it important to have a two-parent household, it's increasingly more apparent that two-parent households are important now in these times that we're living in for the success of the kid, emotional success, right? If you're a boy, your father teaches you how to regulate your emotions, how to handle your masculinity, while your mother also provides that nurturing role for you. But if you're a single parent household, whether it's just the man or just the woman, right, you have too much of one and not the other, right? So one thing I see on the internet a lot is men versus women. Well, it takes men and women to raise a complete child, a child that's emotionally stable. It takes men and women, right? Because some men don't know how to raise men because they weren't raised properly, right? They weren't in tune with their emotion. And some men cannot be in tune with their emotion if they don't have both sides of the spectrum. Men and women complete each other, right? So you need a man and a woman to raise both genders, right? People are talking about, oh, only a man can raise a man, only a woman can raise a... No, both are needed to raise both genders, right? A man and a woman is needed to raise a man. A man and a woman is needed to raise a woman, right? Because contrary to popular theory, the Most High God and the Bible, well, the Most High God is against same-sex marriage. So how how can a woman raise another woman and teach her what the expectations that a man have of her? She can't. Her father has to teach her what the expectations of a man is going to have for her, and what's acceptable that a man should do to her, that a man should not do to her, right? There's a popular saying in the world that a woman's first love is her father, right? A woman's first love from the opposite sex is her father, right? And that's the measuring stick by which she measures other men. But she can't do that if her father's not in her life. Now she's making unwise emotional decisions, right? So absolutely, I agree with the article, right? And the Bible substantiates that, right? That it's increasingly important that a stable two-parent household are needed, first and foremost, to raise a child, right? And our people are the ones that are affected, by and large, disproportionately by a single-parent household. And we're suffering from that. We see unstable, we're seeing unstable, Slovakia, we're seeing unstable children running around ready to take somebody's life at the slightest of insults or at the slightest perceived insults. It might not even be an actual insult towards them, but just how they perceive it, they're willing to take a life. Right? We're seeing women not knowing the power of their tongue, ready to call their brothers or their cousins to come up to the block and smoke somebody, not understanding the power that their mouth holds. Right? But this is something that should have been taught to them by the previous generation, which is not being taught. Right? So we see the emotional unstableness of our people just due to not having that two-parent stable household, right? The stable household with the father leading, the mother being in her right estate, following the father and nurturing the children, and the father being that stable and that positive role model and that strict enforcer, right, to make sure everything sells smooth. We see that missing in our people, and we see our people grow up to be deviants. We see our people grow up to be criminals, as sad as to say, because they had no positive role models to enforce them, to have them steer clear of those choices, right? To whoop them, right? And we see the boys being rebellious, right? Because a boy is naturally going to have more rebellious nature, right? A boy is naturally going to buck up. It's just in his nature. He has too much energy. He wants to do what he wants to do, and he feels you can't tell him anything, right? So when he doesn't have that, he doesn't have somebody of a higher authority, that disciplinarian figure, he's just going to rebel more, right? So you need that. But when you just have that disciplinarian and not the nurturer, right, he grows up, leaves the disciplinarian, just goes wild out, because there was never a nurture aspect of the disciplinarian. So you definitely do need both the disciplinarian, the father, and the nurturer, the mother, to raise a complete, stable human being, right? And our people, the so-called Blacks, Hispanic, and Native Americans, were severely lacking that, right? The so-called black boy is severely suffering from a single-parent household, right? Whether they grow up to be too emotionally not being able to regulate their emotions because they only had a feminine influence in their life, their whole life, or whether they grow up to be too masculine, not knowing how to regulate their emotions because they didn't have any feminine energy around them, right? Because they were only around masculine energy their whole life. So we see that the outcomes, the realistic real life outcomes in real time of our people suffering from single parent household, right? We see that. We see our people suffering. So that's just one of the hurdles that the so-called black boy has to overcome to even grow up to be in a leadership role, right? And throughout that, he has to dodge death threats, death attempts, right, from the so-called white man, the cops, from his own people that are looking to eliminate him, whether it's because of something he did or because outside sources that he cannot control, from his own parents that haven't healed from their trauma, that are abusing and passing on that cycle of trauma, right? Now he grows up. So on top of the conditions that he's actually already living in or growing up in, right? So that's just one of the hurdles that he has to overcome, right? And then throw in the little pit stops along the way that could just become life-ending, right? So that's just one of the things that he has to go through, right? So another thing is bad role models. We don't have any positive role models that a so-called black Latino boy could look
and see in a community, right? You see the dope boys, you see the corner boys working the corner, right? Those are the people that we have to influence us, right? Because as a child, your only options are, oh, I gotta be a rapper, I gotta be a ball player because mom is struggling and I need to make money to get her out of this environment. And the chances of me being a rapper are few and far and slim in between, and the chances of me being a basketball player to make enough money are even farther and fewer in between. So the only thing I see are the corner boys, and they're making money. They're pulling up in the Benzes, right? So I want to go and do that. That's how easily influenced our people are. Let me get a precept in First Corinthians, I believe it is. All right, First Corinthians 15 and 33, I believe. This is the book of First Corinthians, chapter 15 and 33. Be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners. So be not deceived. Evil communications do corrupt good manners, right? That dope boy, once he gets a hold of your kid, it's over, right? Your kid's going to grow up wanting to be just like that, right? And we see TV shows or movies like Power, BMF, things of that nature. Our people glorify those things, right? Those are the hood legends of our community. Those are people we aspire to be. We don't aspire to be doctors. We don't aspire to be lawyers, right? It's nerdy, right? It's not cool to be smart. It's not cool to talk proper. As a so-called black man, you talk proper, you sound white, right? Now, while I don't endorse talking white, while I don't endorse that, the spirit behind it of seeking wisdom or seeking to advance yourself intellectually being frowned upon just because you sound a certain way is the same exact spirit where our people are only glorifying the wicked, the evil thing that's going on, right? Give me 1 second. This precept just popped into mind too. I believe it's in Ecclesiastes. If I can find it, it would be great. Roughly paraphrasing, I'm going to find it. Give me 1 second. But roughly paraphrasing, it says, wisdom extolleth folly. I must needs find the scripture. Give me 1 second. I believe it's in Ecclesiastes. There it is. Ecclesiastes 2, not 7. This is book of Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 13. Do I want to start at 13? Yeah, let's start at 13. Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. Wisdom excelleth folly, right? Wisdom is far beyond folly. Wisdom is far exalted now in this day and age more than folly, right? People love folly, right? Folly is exalted so much more than wisdom in this day and age. It's not cool to seek out wisdom. It's not cool to read a book, right? People will look at you for even appearing to want to seek wisdom. People will look at you for even wearing glasses, 4 eyes, things of that nature, right? And our people are the biggest people that loses when it comes to that type of ideology, right? Because we're the ones that need wisdom the most, yet we're the ones that scrutinize, and we're the ones that vilify wisdom the most, right? But we're the ones that are most destroyed without it, but yet we're the ones that cast it aside the most, right? But it's such a shame as well, because we're the most naturally gifted people on the planet. We're the most naturally gifted race on the planet. The so-called Black or Hispanic race are the most talented individuals on this planet, right? But we're too ashamed to share that talent because the community and an environment which we grow up in that can't let us seek to diversify our talents. The community that we grow up in that frowns upon you wanting to venture outside of playing basketball or rapping, right? We are the most people that are affected by our talents and not being able to bring it out the most. We're the most talented people, but our environment makes it so that talents, if they don't fit into a certain criteria, they're vilified, they're frowned upon. We're too ashamed to do that, right? Imagine how many people were smart enough to go into school and graduate and become doctors in a community and come back and build a clinic, but didn't want to do that because their friends thought it was cool to skip class. And then when they felt in the back of their head that maybe I shouldn't do this, they got peer pressured into it. And they knew that they would have got made fun of if they said they didn't want to skip school, right? Imagine the environment we would have if we just didn't have that attitude. But that attitude comes from the role models that we see, right? That attitude comes from what we perceive as good, what we perceive as cool, and what we want to be, right? But we're not seeing representations of us in a positive light, in a light that motivates us to do better. We're not seeing positive role models such as Mansa Musa, right? We're not seeing the richest king that existed, that built empires with so-called black men. We're not seeing stuff like that. Instead, we're seeing us repetitively depicted as slaves. So much so that when you ask a so-called black child from the age of 13 and under, they'll think that our history started from slavery. They don't know that we had empires in the west coast of Africa, right? They didn't know that, again, like Mansa Musa, the richest man known, was a so-called black man. The Mali Empire, the Ghana Empire, they didn't know empires like that existed, right? They only think that their history starts in slavery because that's what's been repetitively pushed in the media, right? Now people have adopted that mindset. It goes so far as to even the epithet that we call ourselves, right? The thing that denotes our ethnicity, what we are, being black, right? When you look at it etymologically, black is evil, malicious, void of light, right? So when we call ourselves that, words carry a certain vibration. When you call yourself a certain thing long enough, you start to believe it. When you call yourself black so long, you start to believe you're black. You can't accept anything else but you're black. And when you understand what being black is, well, you can't help but behave in a black way. You can't help but behave in an evil way, in a malicious way. You can't help but to kill your brother because that's what being black is. It means being evil. And what more malicious thing is there than to gun down a person that looks just like you, that's going through the same struggle as you, right? So that's just another hurdle that the so-called black boy has to go through, right? The so-called black boy has to go through to survive, to be and put in a position of leadership to even lead his people. But now I'm starting to paint a narrative in your mind of how hard it is for a so-called black man to survive in America when there are things systematically built in to oppress him, right? Fewer opportunities, right? Easier for him to get locked up, right? More time for the same crime. Things of that nature that punish the so-called black man, right? He's not finding any more job opportunities, and what he has to resort to is frowned upon. So when he gets caught, he gets sentenced to jail. But what is he to do? Is just starve, right? So there's hurdles and there's things that the so-called black man has to navigate through from a very, very young age to even survive. And he's behind the curve because there's nobody making him aware of these things that he has to navigate. So it's a miracle, and I mean this by every stretch of the word, it's a miracle that a so-called black man lives to see 25 and he's in his right mental and faculty, right? So when you see a so-called black man, understand when you see a so-called black man, understood what it took for that black boy to grow up to be that black man, right? Not saying by any means that he should stop there, because that's not where the work starts. That's not where the work stops. He has more to do, right? So-called black man has to now become an Israelite, has to understand that he's an Israelite and transform into an Israelite. But he doesn't have that chance to actually even realize that, right? Because most of us aren't taught that we're Israelites from a young age. We have to survive to get to a certain age to get taught that, but we can't survive that because of the hurdles that are placed on our way. All right, so I'm gonna show you the conspiracy in the scriptures that's made for our people, right? The conspiracy that's been made to keep our people downtrodden, right? And why it is that they made a conspiracy. Why we're important enough to have a conspiracy made over us, right? Little old us, so-called black people. We think we're unimportant. We think we're insignificant, but the other nations know that we're not insignificant. They know the role that we have to play. Thus saith the Lord, right? They understand it better than we do, right? Where do I want to start? Is it Judith 5? I believe it's 5. start? I'm going to start at verse 17, and I'm going to give you the context of it, right? So this is the book of Judith, chapter 5, verse 17. And whilst they sin not before their God, they prosper. So this is a recounting of the children of Israel coming out of the land of Egypt and the contract which they entered into with the Most High God. And when they fulfill it, the Most High God is for them, and what it looks like when the Most High God is for them. And when they break it, the Most High God is against them, and then what it looks like when the Most High God is against them. And the other nations having an understanding of that and using that to their advantage to overcome us, right? So that's the context of what's going on. So starting from the top again, Judith, chapter 5, verse 17. And whilst they sinned not before their God, they prospered, because the God that hateth iniquity was with them, right? So whilst we sin not against our God, right, we prospered, right? We elevated. We didn't have to worry about things like a so-called black man having to worry about his life, right? A so-called black boy having to grow up fatherless or motherless, right? Because the mother and father didn't care enough about the child to try to work out whatever situation they were in, right? Because the mother just had sex with whoever and didn't care, because the father just had sex with whoever and didn't care and just moved on with his life and had no thought of whatever life he was bringing into the world, whatever she was bringing into the world, right? Most kids grow with their grandfathers or their grandparents because their mother or father didn't want to bother raising them because they thought they were a hindrance to their life, not knowing that that's your progeny, right? That's what's going to advance you once you die, right? So you go and you live your life, you have your hot girl summer, and then you're in your 40s now with nothing to show for it, with nobody to pass on your legacy to, right? This is our people, right? So they understand that whilst we sin not against our God, we didn't have to worry about things like this because we followed the proper order of things, right? But when they departed from the way which he appointed them, they were destroyed in many battles, very sore, and were led captives into a land that was not theirs. Sounds familiar? Right? We sinned against the Most High God. We were led captive into a land that's not ours, right? And our fathers didn't know, right? And the temple of their God was cast to the ground, and their cities were taken by the enemies. But now they return to their God and come up from the places where they were scattered, and have possessed Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is, and are seated in the hill country, for it was desolate. Now therefore, my Lord and Governor, if there be any error in this people, they sin against their God, this is the conspiracy, right? This is what the conspiracy consists of us being separated from our God, right? Now therefore, my Lord and Governor, if there be any error in this people, and they sin against their God, let us consider that this shall be their ruin. Let us go up, and we shall overcome them. So they understood very clearly what our power source was, right? They knew that we weren't great by ourselves. They knew that we were made great by the power of Yahweh, right? Who is our God, right? They knew that that's how we were made great, and they knew that as long as we disobeyed them, we were in disobedience to them, they could overcome us easily, because the Most High God promised in his curses that that's what would happen to us, and they understood that better than we did at points, right, throughout history. But now it's time for us to reawaken and understand that, right? It's time for us to reawaken and understand that, right? So I'm going to read another precept just to further hammer in the point, right? This is Isaiah 59. And I'm going to start at verse 1. Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, neither is his ear heavy that it cannot hear. But your iniquities have separated between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you that he will not hear, right? So it's not that the Most High God cannot hear us. It's not that he doesn't hear us. It's that our iniquities have separated us, which is what's being reiterated from Judith 5, right? Right, when a person said, let us consider if they sin against their God, it will be for their ruins, right? When we sin, we commit iniquity. So our iniquity separates us from our God. And when our God is separate from us, the enemies or the heathen that are around about us can come together and overtake us. And that looks like, to bring it all home now, that looks like Psalms 83, right? And verse 2. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people. Thy people is the nation of Israel, the so-called blacks, Hispanic, and Native Americans. And they very much understand that to destroy a nation, you have to destroy the men, and then you have to destroy the boys, right? So you don't have to destroy the men if you start when they're boys. So it's very imperative that we teach our boys how to be men in our community, right? How to be stand-up men in our community. So then we can build a nation, right?
And they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones.
So there's a tumult that's being made. A tumult is an assembly of people that are coming together, right? With one consent to do one thing, which is what? We're going to find out.
They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance.
And the name of Israel, true Yasharallah, is no more in remembrance, right? The name of Israel is no more in remembrance, right? Who the true Israelites are no more in remembrance. That's the tumult that they came together to do, right? These nations that are on the verge of war, that hate each other so much, that are on the verge of World War III, could understand and could come together at least to oppress you and to destroy your name. Now, wouldn't that mean that they were in fear of you, that they can do it by themselves, that they had to come together to create a tumult, right? Because you are such a powerful nation when you are in alignment with your God, Yahweh, when you keep his commandments and you're obedient to him, that the only way that they can defeat you is, again, in Judith, is that for you to sin against your God. It'll be for your ruin, right? And that your iniquity separated you from your God, and they could come and cut you off and destroy you, and that the name of Israel may be no more remembers. That's the conspiracy that's being done against the so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native American nation, right? Which starts at the men, which starts at the boys, right? You don't have to go to war with men if they destroy themselves when they're boys, right? You don't have to go to war with men if you start when you're young, right? You don't have to go to war with the men of the nation of Israel when they're too busy killing each other, when they're too busy going to prison, when they're too busy stuck in prison to lead the family, and now all you're left with is the women. And now when the women are left alone, that's another series we're going to go into, right? But when the women are left alone, then there's other tactics that are involved in the destroying of our nation, right? So there's many conspiracies but the biggest conspiracy is to keep us from our God, to keep us from knowing who we are, right? That's the biggest conspiracy that our people have to come to, right? So it would not behoove me if I finished this lesson and I didn't bring this precept out, right? And this is the book of Sirach, chapter 30. He that loveth his son causeth him off to fill the rod, that he may have joy of him in the end, right? So this is the wisdom that we are destroyed for. And this is the wisdom that we're severely lacking. This is the wisdom that comes with teaching his laws, statutes, and commandments to your children every day, as I brought out in the beginning of Deuteronomy 6, right? We're to teach these to our children, these laws, statutes, and commandments to our children day and night. And the wisdom contained in these laws, statutes, and commandments that's been documented by Sirach, right? For Sirach, by his father, or his grandfather, I should say, right? Says that he that loveth his son causeth him to fill the rod off. Why? Because it brings discipline, and a man without discipline, right, is an emotional man. And we see what emotional men are doing to our community, terrorizing us, right? Which is also why I had brought out earlier in Isaiah, right, that the people who lead us are children. They're mentally children because they had not been disciplined, right? They lacked that discipline that would have taught them. They lacked that discipline that would have instructed them. They lacked the person that should have been there to cause him to feel the rod often, so when he grows up, he can have joy of him in the end, right? Now you see many parents that can't joy in their children because they didn't discipline them, or because they weren't there to discipline them, because they had a children and just left it there. They didn't understand the responsibility of bringing a life into the world, right? And our oppressor, our enemies, use that to our advantage, right? Now they use our people for their dirty work. Now they don't even have to fight us. They get us to fight each other, right? Right? He that chasteth his son shall have joy of him, and shall rejoice of him among his acquaintances. Now you can't rejoice of your kids amongst your acquaintances, right? You'll be lucky if out of 4 kids you have one that turns out right? Now you have fear that when you grow up and you're old, your children will send you to the nursing home and they won't look after you. Why? Because we just don't have the love for our children that we should have, and our children don't have that love for us because we're not raising them right. We're not raising them according to scripture, right? We're not raising them according to scripture. We've fallen away from our wisdom, right? Which was the law, statutes, and commandments, which would instruct us, which things like that wouldn't be a problem, all right? Which we're not able to joy, right? We're not able to have rejoicement in our children in front of our acquaintances, right? Now when you go to your acquaintances, always complaining about how much of a demon your child is, or God forbid, putting up candles for a vigil because your child died, right? And now they're saying he was such a good man at the funeral. Meanwhile, he was the one catching all the bodies, right? Meanwhile, he was like people like King Von, right? Now they're saying God bless or he's at peace or stuff like that. But when he was alive, he was terrorizing his own people, right? So we have to do better. We have to now start raising our people to our children, our men, our boys, right? With discipline, right? With emotional intelligence and an integrity to control that emotional intelligence, to not just wild out and shoot the first person that calls you out your character, right? Matter of fact, I'm gonna hold this and I'm gonna come back to this. This is the first law that you should be teaching your kids, right? Leviticus 19, starting at 16. That is the very first law you should be teaching your kids, right? Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people, neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. I am the Lord, right? That is from 16 all the way down to 18, right? That is the very, very first law that you teach your children, right? Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people, neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. I am the Lord, right? So thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer. We know what that means. You're not supposed to be going up and down, telling fibs, telling lies, right? And likewise, you're not supposed to be standing against the blood of your neighbor. You're supposed to be teaching your son, if you see a person of another nation ganging up against a person from your nation, it is your job to equalize that. It is your job to stand up and do something from that. You're not supposed to be seeing that mindset is supposed to be already ingrained in them. It's us against the world, right? You're supposed to teach your children that from the offset, right? With the rod of discipline, right? With those laws, statutes, commandments, and you beat that instruction into the child, right? You beat that instruction into the child. That's what makes a nation. You beat that instruction into the boy, right? And when the boy grows up, he knows better than stray from those instructions, right? When he grows up, he won't leave them. He won't leave the instruction that you gave him because he fears that discipline that you put into him while giving him that knowledge, right? He feared that rod, the fear of you was beat into him, right? As a kid, and that knowledge was beat into him, right? That fear instilled the wisdom in him that is now second nature to him. Now he won't stray from because it's been beat into him, right? But our people don't have that type of mindset anymore, right? Now he becomes a stand-up man in the community. He becomes a man that won't sit by and watch a woman get abused, watch his sisters get abused, right? He becomes a man that won't stand by and watch a heathen have his neck on his brother for 7 minutes while he's suffocating to death. He becomes the type of man that'll see injustice and stand up for it. He becomes the type of man that won't that won't go up and down as a talebearer. He becomes the type of man that loves his brother. He becomes the type of man that protects the community, right? He becomes the type of man that's good with his hands, that's able to contribute something to his nation. He becomes that type of man, instead of the type of man who just stands on the corner all day, smokes, right? Looks on the next brother to plot on to come off. Instead of becoming that, which is detrimental to the community, right? Which is something the community does not need, right? But again, that's the first law that you should be learning. And verse 17 says, thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor and not suffer sin upon him, right? That is the very, very first law that your son should be learning. As an Israelite, that is the very first law that you should be learning. I believe. I could be wrong. I'm not always right, but I personally believe that is one of the very first law that you should be learning as an Israelite, right? I believe that's one of the very first law that you should be learning as an Israelite, because it builds solidarity with each other, right? It shows us who the enemy is and who you are, right? And by you, I mean the collective you, who you as a nation are, right? The people that are going through the same thing. It shows that. It shows who you're fighting against, and it shows what you're training to fight against, right? When you have a common enemy, you can train for that. When you see yourself as the enemy, then there's really no training. There's really no unity when you don't have a common cause, right? So it builds that all within that one law, right? So let's go back to Ecclesiasticus. He that teacheth his son grieveth the enemy, and before his friend he shall rejoice in him, right? He that teacheth his son grieveth the enemy. Now we don't teach our son. The enemy teaches our son, and now we're grieving, right? The enemy is teaching our son and grieving us. The opposite is happening. We're not teaching our son and grieving the enemy. the enemy is teaching our son, and we're the one that's grieving, right? The enemy is conditioning our son to be the biggest weapon used against his community, and we're allowing that, right? Interracial marriages are happening that are stealing wealth from the athletes that are amassing wealth, that are not bringing it back to the marriage, bringing it back to the community, because from a young age they've been taught that white is right, and if I make it in the world, I must have a white woman. Things of that nature that's going on, that the enemy is teaching our children, which we can't be bothered to teach our children, right? Even our women, right? They think that they gotta have the light skin, they gotta have the wavy hair, or else they're not important. That dark skin and kinky hair is an abomination or something, right? And they gotta bleach their skin, and they gotta get BBLs and things of that nature, right? Because we can't be bothered to teach our sons, we can't be bothered to teach our daughters, right? We can't be bothered to greet the enemy, but the enemy damn sure can create a social media weapon to influence our children to grieve us, though. But we can't be bothered to teach our kids, and we're right there with our kids, which goes back to the two-parent household that I was talking about earlier, right? Very, very important that a two-parent, and it's easier to regulate what's going in and out your house when you have a two-parent household, because one person is out getting the money and the other is inside with their kids, raising the kids with a unified doctrine. But you can't do that if you only have one person, one parent in the house that has to go out and get the money. Now the kids are left in the house to fend for themselves. Who's raising the kids? The media. Who's controlling the media? The enemy. The enemy is using the media to raise your kids against you. Now your kids grow up and you can't get nothing out of them because they've already been conditioned by the media that you're the enemy. And we're really the enemy is the media that conditioned them. The enemy is the other nation that conditioned them against you. But again, these are the things that our people don't consider. These are the people, this is the conspiracy that's been done to our people that our people don't want to consider, right? That our people don't want to reverse, and that our people are fine living in the conspiracy that's been done with them. The conspiracy to destroy the name of Israel, and they've done a very thorough job, right? But the Most High God have put in the spirit of a couple brothers like myself to go out there and teach the word of the Most High God, to try to reverse this conspiracy, right? To try to reverse this conspiracy and to try to wake our people back up to who they are as a nation, right? So I hope with that, brothers and sisters, we're at least a little bit edified, right? So Lord willing, what I plan to do is turn this into a series, right? So the first series was focusing a little bit on the so-called black boy and the importance that he has his nation. And by so-called black, I already stated this already. I'm including the Hispanic boy as well, right? The so-called black and Hispanic boy, their importance in their nation, and how detrimental it is that they be raised properly, right? The importance that they have in the community, and the gap that is left when they're not raised properly, and the effects that they're not raised properly, because they are the leaders, right? Men are the leaders of the community because they are the leaders of their household, right? And when they're not raised properly, we're not imbued with the tools to lead that household properly. Now we have a weak nation. When we have a weak nation, other people can come in and conquer us, which, as we see right now, we've been conquered. We've been overtaken, right? We don't speak our language. We don't have our own currency. We don't have our own land. We don't have our own government, nor our own autonomy. So we've been properly conquered in all fronts and all aspects. We've been properly conquered. And it's going to take divine intervention to turn the scales. And the only way we can call that divine intervention to turn the scales is by the keeping of these laws and these commandments. That is our one miracle opportunity to turn the tides, right? To completely turn the tides of what's been done to us. Otherwise, we're stuck in a situation, and it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse, because one generation, the earth says it. Matter of fact, let me get it in Ecclesiastes. Just right open up to it. So this is book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1 and verse 4. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever, right? So our generation, we inherited a legacy from the previous generation. They're gone now, right? But the folly that they've committed, right, the mistakes that they've made, they've passed on to their kids, right? Now their kids inherited that, and instead of reversing the folly of the mistakes that's been done to them, they exalted it. That goes back to what I brought on Ecclesiastes earlier, that wisdom excelleth folly. Instead of reversing that folly that's been done, they excel the folly that was given to them. Now they made more wickedness, right? And if we're here for a couple generations, I shudder to think how much more we could excel the Father that we see now. I shudder to think how early kids would be catching bodies, because now we see 13-year-olds on buses catching bodies. I shudder to think what that will look like in a couple generations. What would it be? 4-year-olds catching bodies? I shudder to think, and that's something that should send a shiver up the spine of every so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native American man. How much evil can our community get, right? The only way we can reverse the conspiracy that's been done to us, the only way we could reverse the effects of the conspiracy that's done to us, is by coming back to the Most High God, right? So I hope with that, again, brothers and sisters been edified, right? And they learned something, and they've learned what has been done to us, what we're suffering from, and they have a bit more compassion on each other when dealing with our nation, right? When dealing with our people. I know we can be a bit hard-headed, right? But it's because of what we've been through. It's because of the situations that we've been through. It's because of what's been done to us and what we perpetuate. Now, in no wise am I a victim blaming, right? But you can't expect the enemy that did this to you to also be the one that lends you a helping hand to get you out of this situation. So we have to be the ones to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and start to mend the damage that's done to us, right? So in no wise am I acquitting the so-called white man, or acquitting the Arab man, right? Or the Moabite man, or every other Asian man, or any other nation that's had a hand in our captivity. In no way am I acquitting them, right? But you can't expect them that made a tumult to come against us to be the same ones that are not going to be canceling out that tumult, right? The ones that are canceling out that tumult to come help us. We can't expect them to do that. We have to be the ones to do that ourselves. And we do that by coming back to this right here, right? This right here. That's what's very important to the building of the nation, right? And this right here teaches us what it is we must do, right? You start with the so-called black boy. You teach him discipline. The discipline is what the law says, the commandments, right? So-called black man, so-called black boy dreams of being somebody important. The only way you can be that is by coming back to the most like God. He's already the most important person on the planet. He's a so-called black man. He's a so-called Israelite boy, right? He's a God in the making on earth. The Most High God made him to be a God. He just has to tap into that power. He can't tap into the power unless he learns that, unless he's taught that. So that discipline is very important. You gotta start with the boys. You start with the boys, they become men. Men grow up to lead communities. They grow up to lead households, right? You lead a successful household, you build a strong nation. You lead a weak household, you build a weak nation. A strong nation goes far. A weak nation doesn't stand at all, right? So for us to stand and for us to go far, we have to start with the boys, the leaders of the household, right? So again, I hope with that, brothers and sisters, been edified, they learn something, right? And they can use that to combat the oppression that's been done to us. And again, they have empathy when they're dealing with their own people, because we need empathy and understanding to get our people to work, right? You have to have patience with your people. You have to understand what's been done to them. You have to understand what they're going through, right? Whew. So with that, I say shalom and mu'af,